3 weeks ago, I was sitting in a folding lawn chair under a pecan tree that's older than most of the houses in this county. Dust still clinging to my boots the way it always does out here. A lukewarm beer sweating in my hand, holding up a crooked piece of cardboard with 7.5 scrawled across it in red marker, while a neat line of HOA officers in matching navy polos stood on the other side of my iron gate yelling like volume alone could rewrite property law. And as I watched their faces twist between anger, confusion, and disbelief, something finally settled deep in my chest. Not anger, not fear, just clarity. This whole thing had never really been about a road or safety or access. It was about control, plain and simple, and what happens when people who are used to being obeyed finally run headfirst into someone who doesn't bend. Because this land, this patch of dirt, grass, gravel, and stubborn silence, is not just something I own. It's something I belong to. 12 acres just outside a small Texas town where folks still wave when they pass you on the road, where people remember your name longer than they remember your mistakes, and where quiet isn't something you buy, it's something you protect. It's something you protect. My grandfather, Walter Hayes, bought this land back when it was nothing but scrub and wind, when the nights were darker and the stars felt close enough to grab. He built the house himself, crooked in places, solid where it mattered, and he laid the gravel road in the late 60s with rented equipment, bad coffee, and a mule that hated mornings as much as he did. He used to say, "Son, land remembers who respects it." Back then I thought it was just old man wisdom, something you nod at politely. Turns out it was a warning wrapped in a lesson. I grew up here, learned how to drive on that gravel road, fishtailing a little too fast, heart pounding like freedom itself had a speed limit. Learned how to bleed fixing fence wire that didn't want fixing. Learned how to sit still long enough to hear coyotes talk to each other at night like they were sharing secrets meant only for the dark. Learned how storms sound different when there's nothing between you and the sky. Learned what it meant to take responsibility for something bigger than yourself, something that doesn't forgive shortcuts or excuses. But like most people, I left for a while. Tried cities. Tried offices with fluorescent lights and meetings that could have been emails. Tried being someone who wore nicer shoes and lived closer to other people's walls. I chased promotions, paychecks, the idea that success lived somewhere else, somewhere louder, somewhere faster, and for a while I thought I'd found it. I had the job, the routine, the kind of life people describe as stable. But every time things got quiet, real quiet, I felt restless, like I'd traded something essential for convenience, like I'd stopped breathing deep just to fit in better. I'd sit in traffic, windows up, radio on, and catch myself missing the sound of gravel under tires, missing the way silence feels when it isn't empty. No matter where I went, every road bent back here eventually. The land waited. It always does if it knows you belong. When I finally came home for good, that first morning felt like an exhale I'd been holding for years. Coffee on the porch, dogs stretched out in the dirt. The sun rising slow behind the trees like it wasn't in a hurry for anyone. I remember thinking, this is what peace actually feels like. Not the kind you talk about, the kind you live inside. Not perfect, just honest. That quarter-mile gravel road only led to one place, my gate. Heavy. Iron. My last name welded across the middle, letters my uncle helped cut decades ago. Not threatening, not flashy, just honest, the kind of gate that doesn't ask permission and doesn't apologize. For a long time, nobody challenged it. The mail came when it came. The dogs barked when they felt like it. Neighbors minded their own business. Peace wasn't a luxury, it was the baseline, something you noticed only when it was gone. Then one spring morning I noticed survey flags popping up along the county road like someone had spilled a box of toothpicks. Bright orange, impossible to miss. At first I didn't think much of it. Land gets sold. Things change, that's life. A few weeks later came the trucks, bulldozers, concrete, framing crews, the air filled with dust and diesel. Mornings weren't quiet anymore. The ground shook in small, constant ways that made the dogs uneasy. Within a year, a brand new subdivision rose out of the scrub, calling itself Cedar Bluff Estates, which was funny because there wasn't a cedar or a bluff anywhere nearby. Along with it came the HOA, and along with the HOA came its president, Lydia Crane. If you've ever dealt with an HOA, you already know her. Perfect haircut that never moved, sharp smile that didn't reach her eyes. She talked about community standards and shared responsibility, like they were sacred text. Like disagreement itself was a moral failure. She shook my hand once firm and practiced, and looked past me like she was already deciding where things would go. That was the first time I felt that itch between my shoulders, the sense that someone had already made plans for my life without bothering to ask. At first, I ignored them. Their rules weren't mine. Their fences weren't my fences. Different worlds, sharing a zip code, nothing more. I figured they'd build their houses, people would settle in, and we'd all coexist politely at a distance. I underestimated how much some people hate being told. No, the problem was access. The backside of their development ran straight into rough land. Rocky, uneven, useless for heavy trucks and emergency vehicles. Somebody miscalculated. Somebody rushed a plan to meet a deadline or a profit margin. And suddenly, the only clean route in was my southern road. The road my grandfather built. The road clearly marked on my deed as private. They saw convenience. I saw a boundary that had already been paid for in sweat, blood, and time. The first visit was polite. 3 men. Clipboards. Corporate smiles practiced in mirrors. Just temporary access, they said. For construction. For emergency services. For the good of the community. They said it like they were offering me a favor. Like I should feel honored to help. I said no. Calm. Clear. This is private property. No anger. No explanation. Lydia didn't hear no. She heard resistance, and resistance to people like her sounds like disrespect. That's when things escalated. Pamphlets showed up accusing me of endangering families. Emails went out claiming I was blocking ambulances that had never once tried to come down my road. A website popped up with a grainy photo of my gate, labeled a public safety hazard. Neighbors I'd never met started whispering my name like it tasted bad. A few slowed their cars when they drove past, craning their necks like they expected to see a monster pacing behind the fence. One woman actually shouted at me from her SUV that I was selfish and un-American. That one stuck with me longer than I expected. Not because it hurt, but because it showed how easily people confuse inconvenience with injustice. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I added another lock, installed more cameras. Silence makes insecure people unravel because it gives them nothing to push against. Then one night at 2:17 a.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand. Motion alert. I rolled out of bed, boots on, jacket over my shoulders, checked the feed. 2 figures dressed in black stood at my gate. Sparks flew as a grinder hit steel. One of them held up a piece of paper like it carried divine authority. It didn't. Fake court order. Fake badge. Real crime. They didn't see me filming from the dark. They did see the sheriff's lights crest the hill. People confess real fast when gravel's in their mouth, and reality shows up wearing a badge. After that failed, the HOA shifted tactics. They went public. One morning, a crowd lined my fence holding signs about shared responsibility and community access. Someone brought a megaphone. Someone brought their kids, which bothered me more than anything else. I watched from the porch for a while, listening to the chanting echo against metal and wood. Then I grabbed my lawn chair, my cooler, and that cardboard sign, sat down like I was watching a parade, held up a 7.5. Gave them notes on synchronization. A few laughed nervously. A few got angrier. Lydia's jaw tightened like she was chewing on a nail. Humor drives bullies insane because it denies them the outrage they came for. But the ugliest move came a few days later. A man in a polo shirt marched up to my gate, started snapping photos, shouting accusations about safety and lawsuits. Then, without me touching him, he brushed my shoulder and collapsed into the dirt, screaming assault like he'd been hit by lightning. The crowd gasped right on cue. Phones went up. Honestly, the performance was impressive. The only flaw was the GoPro blinking red on my hat and the security camera 10 feet behind him. The deputy didn't even sigh when he reviewed the footage, just cuffs. The crowd went silent in that uncomfortable way people get when they realize they backed the wrong story. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. A few mornings later, I heard the sound before I saw it. A deep diesel rumble that doesn't belong on quiet land. A bright yellow excavator rolled up along my fence line. Survey flags planted right on my posts, like they owned the dirt beneath them. Workers said they were pre-approved. By who? Lydia. County inspector arrived. Sheriff arrived. No permits. No authorization. Just confidence pretending to be legality. Machines backed out real slow once paperwork entered the conversation, like embarrassed animals pretending they'd never been there. That night, a man named Evan Brooks came to my gate. HOA treasurer. Pale. Tired. Honest in the way only someone backed into a corner can be. He kept glancing over his shoulder like the dark itself might rat him out. He handed me a flash drive and said, "She's going to blame me." Inside were emails, forged approvals, shell accounts. Over $300,000 gone. Payments labeled security operations. Conflict mitigation. Lydia had been funding intimidation and calling it community protection. And when things started unraveling, she planned to let Evan take the fall and walk away clean. I didn't blast it online. I didn't threaten anyone. I invited sunlight. That Saturday, I hosted an open house. Folding tables at the end of my driveway. Coolers of water, documents laid out clean and simple. Deeds, maps, receipts, timelines. Reporters came. Neighbors came. Some apologized outright. Eyes down, voices small. Some stayed quiet and read every page twice. A few just stood there shaking their heads like they couldn't believe how close they'd come to swallowing a lie whole. Truth doesn't yell. It waits, and it lets people reach it on their own. Court came next. Lydia sat stiff while the videos played. Grinder sparks lighting up the night, fake orders with bad fonts, stage theatrics on my gravel drive. Evan testified, voice shaking at first, then steady once the words finally came out. The judge denied the HOA petition and referred the case for criminal review. No speeches, no drama, just finality, the kind that lands heavy and doesn't bounce. 2 weeks later, sheriff's cars rolled into Cedar Bluff Estates. Not to my gate this time. To Lydia's front porch. Fraud. Conspiracy. Trespass. The same sign she'd smiled under. A community of trust rattled in the wind as they cuffed her. Neighbors watched from windows and porches, phones half raised, unsure whether to record or just witness the moment. Power looks a lot smaller when it's wearing handcuffs. It's quiet again now. Real quiet. The good kind. The road's still mine. The gate's still closed. Always will be. I don't hate my neighbors. Most of them were sold a lie, and fear makes people act foolish. But boundaries don't defend themselves, and peace that costs your integrity isn't peace at all. It's just surrender dressed up in nicer language. So here's what I want to know. If you were standing where I stood, with an entire neighborhood telling you to cave for the sake of harmony, would you have opened the gate? Or would you have said the same 3 words I did? My land, my rules. Drop your thoughts below. I read every comment. And I'm genuinely curious where you draw your line.